On a Sunday night in August 1971, the President of the United States interrupted regular television programming to announce something that would permanently change how every dollar in your wallet works. No vote, no public debate, no warning, he just did it. And the craziest part? Most Americans had absolutely no idea what he'd actually done. Some of them still don't. To understand what Nixon destroyed in 15 minutes of television, you need to understand what the world had built over the previous 3 decades. It started in 1944. World War II was still raging, but Allied leaders already knew they were going to win, and they knew that after the war, the global economy would be completely shattered. So 44 nations sent representatives to a small resort town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. Their goal was audacious: build an entirely new global financial system before the old one finished collapsing. What they designed was elegant in its simplicity. Every major currency in the world would be pegged to the US dollar, and the US dollar would be backed by gold. 1 troy ounce of gold equaled $35. Exactly, always. Every country that held US dollars could walk up to the United States government and exchange them for physical gold at that fixed rate. No exceptions, no negotiation. You hand us dollars, we hand you gold. This was the anchor of the entire global economy. Every currency on Earth ultimately connected back to one thing: gold sitting in American vaults. For 25 years it worked. Then America started spending money it didn't have. In the 1960s, the United States did something financially reckless on a historic scale. It tried to fight a massive foreign war and build an enormous domestic welfare state simultaneously. Vietnam was bleeding the treasury. Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs, Medicare, Medicaid, education funding, poverty programs, cost billions more. The problem was simple: they were spending more dollars than America had gold to back them. The promise was $35 per ounce, but the promise only holds if you have enough gold to make good on it. And the world noticed. France noticed first. French President Charles de Gaulle looked at American spending, looked at American gold reserves, and made a calculation. He concluded that America was printing dollars faster than it was mining gold, which meant the dollar was being quietly inflated, which meant anyone holding dollars was being quietly robbed. So France started sending ships to New York, physical ships, with instructions to collect physical gold in exchange for France's dollar holdings. It was technically legal. It was also a declaration of war on the Bretton Woods system. France wasn't the only one watching. Other countries started doing the same calculation, and when they ran the numbers, they started lining up too. America's gold reserves were draining fast. By 1971, the United States held $10 billion in gold, but it owed foreign governments $80 billion in dollars that could theoretically be exchanged for that gold. The math was impossible. The system was already broken. Everyone in the government knew it. What nobody knew was how close the whole thing was to collapsing in public, until one weekend in August. Friday, August 13th, 1971, 15 men are secretly driven to Camp David, the presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains. Their phones are confiscated, the press is told nothing, the public is told nothing. These 15 men include the Secretary of the Treasury, the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, and some of the most powerful economic minds in the United States government. They have one weekend to make a decision that will affect every person on Earth. Nixon lays out the situation plainly. The gold window, the promise to exchange dollars for gold, cannot stay open. If they don't act immediately, foreign governments will drain Fort Knox completely. The dollar will collapse. The entire Bretton Woods system will implode. Some advisors argue for temporary measures, buying time, negotiating with allies, doing this through proper international channels. Nixon rejects this. There isn't time for proper channels, there isn't time for international consultation, there isn't time for congressional approval. He's going to go on television Sunday night and announce that the dollar is no longer convertible to gold. Done. One of the men in that room later described the mood as surreal. They were about to unilaterally detonate the global financial architecture that 44 nations had spent years building, without telling any of those nations first, without telling the American public, without a vote. On Sunday evening, Nixon went on television. He talked for 18 minutes. He blamed foreign currency speculators. He called it a temporary measure. He used the phrase, "I am not going to let the speculators break the American dollar." He did not mention that he was permanently severing the dollar from gold. He did not explain that this decision would change every currency on Earth. He called it the Nixon shock. America thought they were watching an economic speech. They were watching the end of an era that had shaped civilization for 5,000 years. Monday morning, finance ministers around the world woke up to discover the anchor of the entire global financial system had been removed overnight. Without warning, without consultation, the reaction was somewhere between fury and panic. Every currency that had been pegged to the dollar was suddenly unpegged, floating, untethered, worth whatever the market decided it was worth on any given day. For the first time since 1944, there was no fixed point, no anchor, no gold. Here's the twist nobody expected. Americans loved it. The stock market went up. Nixon's approval ratings went up. The speech was framed as decisive leadership, as protecting America from foreign speculators, as strength. The public had no framework to understand what had actually happened. They saw a confident president taking action, they cheered. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, economists were having a very different conversation. Because Nixon had called it temporary, it was not temporary. The gold window has never reopened. It has been 50 years. No American president has ever restored dollar-gold convertibility. What Nixon described as an emergency measure became permanent without anyone ever making the decision to make it permanent. It just stayed closed, and the world moved on. Here's what changed when Nixon closed the gold window. Before 1971, every dollar in existence was a claim on physical gold. The government could only print as many dollars as it had gold to back them. The money supply was anchored to something real. After 1971, the dollar became what economists call fiat currency. It is backed by nothing except the government's promise that it's worth something, and the full faith and credit of the United States government. In 1971, the total U.S. money supply was roughly $600 billion. Today, it is over $21 trillion. That expansion was only possible because the gold anchor was gone. Under the gold standard, you cannot print money that has no gold behind it. Under fiat, the limit is essentially political will. A dollar in 1971 had the purchasing power of roughly $9 today, meaning if you had held $1,000 in cash since Nixon's speech, it would be worth about $110 in real terms now. The money didn't disappear, it just diluted, quietly, slowly, over 50 years, and nobody voted on any of this. Not the transition to fiat currency, not the ability to print unlimited money, not the permanent end of the gold standard. 15 men in a room at Camp David on a Friday night decided. Nixon announced it on Sunday, and that was that. Here's the detail that should live in your head rent-free. Nixon explicitly called closing the gold window a temporary measure. Those were his words, temporary. 10 presidents have served since that Sunday night speech. Not one of them has reopened the gold window. Not one of them has proposed reopening it. Not one of them has held a public debate about whether to reopen it. The most consequential permanent change to the global monetary system in the 20th century was implemented as a temporary emergency measure and then simply never reversed. The gold is still there, in Fort Knox, in the Federal Reserve vaults in New York. Hundreds of billions of dollars worth of physical gold that the United States government owns. It's just not connected to anything anymore. It's decorative. The anchor of the global economy for 5,000 years is now decorative. Here's your final thought. The money in your bank account right now is not backed by gold. It is not backed by silver. It is not backed by any physical asset of any kind. It is backed by the collective agreement that it has value. That agreement was formalized not through democratic process, not through public debate, not through international consensus. It was formalized on a Sunday night in August 1971 when a president interrupted television programming and 15 men at Camp David decided how the world's money would work. You didn't get a vote. Your parents didn't get a vote. Nobody asked. And the craziest part, the system has worked well enough that most people never even thought to ask. Until now. What do you think? Was abandoning the gold standard the right call or the biggest unelected decision in modern history? Tell me in the comments. And if this made you look at your wallet differently, subscribe, because we're just getting started on the things nobody explains but everyone should know.